you think anything's lost in the sterile research setting that you were kind of forced into by the system? Do you think there's anything lost in set and setting on the experience, or do you think because it can blast off, it doesn't matter?
Well, you know, obviously I was concerned about people getting this drug in a hospital setting with a couple of IVs in place and a rectal temperature monitor in place and a blood pressure cuff, and they're just completely, you know, well, they're completely helpless. And in a way, I mean, that's what happens with a big dose of DMT, is you're totally helpless. You know, so they were getting ready to be even more totally helpless. So I think it wasn't a bad thing, and may have even been a good thing. And you know, in terms of the hospital setting, people were really happy to be in the hospital because it isn't an uncommon experience to at least go through a few minutes of being concerned that you've died. And you know, they could think to themselves, well, if I've died, I'm in a hospital. And if my heart stopped, or I've had a stroke, or you know, what have you, there's a response team just down the hall that can take care of it. You know, so it was reassuring, actually. I started doing some dose response work giving psilocybin, and you know, the hospital is a distinct disadvantage, you know, to give a longer acting compound like that in, which was one of the reasons that I stopped doing the work.
So tell me how you felt after you got a call from this guy, Mitch Schultz, and he wants to make a movie out of your book, and how you went through your address book and said, yeah, I think some of my friends might be useful, and you kind of helped Mitch zip it all together.
Yeah, well, over the course of the history of the book, I've gotten quite a few emails from people saying, I want to do a film about the book. So, you know, I'd say, well, that's fine. You know, come on out to New Mexico. And, you know, nobody did. So, you know, after I got the email from, you know, from Mitch, you know, that sounds interesting, you know, come on out to New Mexico. And, you know, so he did, in a blizzard in January. You know, I'm like, he drove the 3 hours between the Albuquerque airport and Taos. And we spent some time at my house, and we shook hands and got started within a month.
I just wanted to say congratulations, and although we understand this may not be the final, I was really grateful to see it, and especially the balance of science and spirituality and visionary experience and such well-shot interviews that were really pithy, meaningful, getting you to the heart of the sort of reality opening and changing kind of experiences that they'd been through. So it really was, I think, informative in the many ways that someone who knows nothing about this subject would be transported and yet not really threatened so much. And there's so much hysteria about psychedelic use that to see so many sober people discussing the matter intermingled with the visionary sort of retinal worlds made, I think, for an educational leap in psychedelic filmmaking. So, so congratulations to both of you.
First of all, thank you. First of all, for you guys hosting us and for the comments. It really has been on the forefront of my mind from the time I started the film. You know, the science and spirituality aspect of having those two, and I think especially with the science aspect, easier for us in the Western world to be able to kind of swallow this pill a little bit with Rick's research to start with, and at least giving us a sounding board to go out there and talk about these experiences. So thank you, and thanks for hosting us. Yeah. Anything for you? No. Okay, that's easy. I agree.
You sure you don't?
Oh, it's just been a crazy weekend. I came in Thursday night and had a couple of interviews Friday, and on the Horizons meeting started this weekend too. So I presented the ideas for the new book I'm working on, which is sort of the spiritual aspect of all the work, which was kind of an emotional presentation. It's the first time I had given a lecture in 15 years, actually. So it was kind of, standing in front of 300 people and kind of, putting myself out there on some stuff I didn't really know that much about. So, I'm more into answering questions probably than...
I have the first few, and I think Alex has some too, and then we'll open it up to the floor. I have some questions I wanted to ask. Just like, wow, that was such an incredible movie. I just loved it so much. And the thing that really struck me about it, one of the things that really struck me about it was that it was like a 2-hour ad for DMT. It was like basically, how could you watch that movie and not want to do that if you had never, you know what I mean? It really promoted the product. And I don't think that really was, well, after you hear what Houston Smith has to say about it, and he goes like, throwing Timothy Leary under the bus for like, telling the truth about LSD and like how awesome it was, then you have, this movie saying very similar things. I really listened for any negatives, I'm wondering if I took any notes on, difficult to act on. I just captured that from Graham. I'm not sure what that was about. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. I didn't hear of any negatives that were proposed in the movie, any drawbacks, any like, it's not... People warned. I mean, there were some warnings about like whether this is the thing for you, but for the most part, it was a fairly strong statement of its elucidating qualities, many of them. And So I thought that was interesting, that people see Timothy Leary back in the 60s as being some reviled character for talking about how amazing that experience was that he had. Basically for proposing it to others, not just telling his own experience. But and then we talk about this in 2010, and it's, I mean, I was down with everything that was said, but I just wondered how you feel about that. Do you have any response?
Well, I mean, speaking of Tim, it was interesting how many people were talking about Tim at the meeting down in Manhattan this weekend. I think he did some good and he did some harm, just like anybody else, with a lot of smart ideas and interesting experiences. So, I don't really come down on one particular, side of the fence as far as Tim did. I don't think many of us would have taken psychedelics if it weren't for Tim. On the other hand, a lot of people took them that probably, shouldn't have. But speaking of the movie, which I was just starting to think about finally, it was interesting to speak to the volunteers. I hadn't seen some of them for 15 to 18 years after the study was done. In the first dose response study that took place in the end of 1990 till the end of 1991, and our first round of interviews in Albuquerque, which was mostly the old volunteers, took place in about 2007. So I hadn't seen some of those people for 16 years. If you recall from the end of the book, I kind of concluded that their participation in the study had been kind of a wash. There were profound psychedelic experiences, but I hadn't really seen any integration or any major life changes in the volunteers. But I think I just hadn't given their participation in the study long enough to settle in. And it took 5-10 years for a lot of people to really make the most or integrate what had happened to them as volunteers in the DMT work. And a lot of people had changed their jobs or had changed the focus of their ongoing work. Some had started spiritual practices. So I think I was a little jaded by the time the work ended. It was very gratifying, actually quite surprising, to hear how moved and impacted the volunteers had been, so many years down the road.
Sounds like an abridged version to me. An updated research or something. I think that's, I was just recounting, like from my first psychedelic experience in 1975, it probably wasn't until 1980 that visually it really showed up in a big way, So it took like some time to begin to integrate. Like universal mind lattice or psychic energy system or a variety of other those things. Yeah, that was more rapid, because that was Terrence actually gave me my first dose of our first DMT, and which led to my painting, the Transfiguration painting, and that I think that probably many of the people are here tonight because they may have had the experience, and it's so mysterious. And I think you allowed it to remain so. That was one of the gifts of the film as well, that although it had a medical spine, it was opening the questions up rather than trying to settle things, which I think is much more sensible in relationship to these substances.
There we go, back. Yeah, I mean, since we don't really have any answers, and that was the thing. I didn't want to try to go in and say, this is what's happening. And from the few times that we've shown the film in groups, it spawns conversation immediately. And so just to have some of those questions presented, it automatically just kind of gets the juices flowing. And people have been responding to that and starting to talk about those questions and trying to, wrap their heads around them, which I love. And that's part of what I wanted to do with the film, was just to get people to think and know that everything that they do know about this stuff is partially false, at least. So, yeah, thank you, because I really wanted to kind of leave those questions open. And I think Rick kind of came across the same thing in your study. He just couldn't describe it, and I think that took a lot of balls to say, I don't know what's happening here as a doctor, so.
Well, that's true. I had a tiger by the tail, and wasn't quite sure what to make of it. I come across as pretty, mild-mannered or perplexed in the movie at times, and I think that's how I was starting to feel towards the end of it. I was giving so many people so much DMT. I was going in 6 days a week sometimes, giving people DMT, and that's all. I mean, I was just feeling so stoned and so disoriented myself, and I wasn't expecting the sort of stories that I heard. I kind of went into the work expecting a Zen Buddhist enlightenment sort of phenomenon to be the end result of these high doses, or else the more typical near-death kinds of things. But instead, there are these the volunteers just entered this world of light with these beings that they interacted with, that they were just overwhelmed by. And I just wasn't prepared, didn't really have a model that could incorporate people's stories. So, for those who have read the book, I describe how the studies ended, which I think is a pretty accurate representation. But I guess tonight I'd just like to say it was just too much. I just couldn't get my head around what was happening, and just had to stop. It's interesting in terms of the conference that's been going on in Manhattan about the resurgence of psychedelic research, and it's very interesting to hear people talk about giving psychedelics again, because they're talking about everything except the psychedelic experience.